I'm Mark Henick. This is So-Called Normal. Welcome to the show. It's the day after St. Patrick's Day. You doing okay? You recovering all right, if that's your thing? I'm half Irish, so I'm getting too old, I think, to do the St. Pat's thing anymore, but maybe someday. I didn't do it this year, but maybe one of these days I'll get back to it. Anyway, this week on the show, we've got my friend Marci Ien. She's a co-host on The Social on CTV. Just an all-around fabulous person. She's a former co-host of Canada AM, and one of the first people who really got into helping me tell my story, certainly in terms of finding Mike. I went on Canada AM and told the story about how this complete stranger in a light brown jacket saved my life, and Marci Ien helped me to do that, and helped me to ask the public for their help in finding this complete stranger that I knew next to nothing about, and then brought cameras along, and he came on the show then with me the next morning, and it was the first time that I had met him, and I didn't even know he still existed. So she had a really important part of bringing my story full circle, and I'm so grateful to her for that. A big part of what we talk about in the show today, and what Marci and I talk about all the time, is transitions and conquering challenges. She reflects on a terrible school shooting in Loche, Saskatchewan, and how it deeply had affected her as a storyteller, and moving from telling stories like that in the news and in her personal life into now what she's doing in entertainment and in production on a daily morning show. So we had a fabulous conversation, and it really reminded me, I've been reflecting on this a lot, a quote from the author Neil Gaiman, and I'll paraphrase it, but he talks about this idea that the point of great stories isn't to show you that monsters and dragons exist. It's to show you that monsters and dragons can be defeated. And I love that's really what Marci and I talk a lot about today. So I hope you enjoy our conversation. Without further ado, here's Marci Ien on So-Called Normal.
Well, my name is Marci Ien. I grew up in Scarborough, Ontario, Canada. I am a journalist. I am co-host of CTV's The Social. Before that, I was a co-host and news anchor on Canada AM. I'm a mom of two, a wife. I'm an aunt, a really proud aunt, helped to raise my three nieces, who I'm so proud of. I call them my first batch of kids. I'm a sister. I've got one sister, Lorraine. And, I'm in a space right now where I'm feeling really good about things. Yeah. Things have just come together quite nicely. Yeah, and we'll talk more about that.
You sound like that's unexpected, or
well, you just never know.
Right.
You just never know. Transition is an interesting thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
A couple years ago, when Canada AM ended, I knew that I would be fine. I knew I had a job. I just didn't really know what the next chapter would look like.
Right.
And that is an interesting place to be. And the questions that one asks oneself.
Right.
I was able to say, well, what do I want to do? Where do I want to go? And for the first time in my life and career, to actually halt and take some time to think about that.
Right.
And then been given some opportunities to look at. And The Social was just the best choice.
Yeah.
The best choice.
So let's start at the start then, because I think you certainly rose to national fame on Canada AM, but you had been a broadcaster for a while before that too. So
okay, so here's the deal. I am going to be 50 in July, and in July
you're not.
I am. I'm going to be 50 in July. And when July comes, I will be celebrating 40 years of television.
Wow.
That is the situation. And it boggles the mind. And that's
Wait a minute. So you're turning 50, 40 years until. So you started when
I started as a kid.
I've never been great at math, but I think I can figure that out.
So at 10 years of age,
old.
I will tell you this. So at 10 years old, my dad is a retired educator. And at the time, he was a principal in a school in North York, Ontario. We lived in Scarborough. And there was this particular school that he was at. One of the teachers there had a kid who did commercials and who was into theater. And this teacher spent some time with me. I was in the school sometimes. Teachers got to know me. an audition came up for a show. And she said to my dad, you know what? Marci would be good for this. And he said, what do you mean? Like, I don't know about any of this stuff. And, you know, but it was an open call audition for a show called Circle Square. And they asked us to sing a little bit. I had to read some script. I had never done this before.
Right.
They asked us to read some script. Then I got a call back.
So what was the show? What was the show about?
So the show basically was 10, we had cast between 10 and 12 kids. It changed through the years. There was a clubhouse. Kids, us being one of them, would have a dilemma. So I would come into the clubhouse and say, you know, today at school, someone tried to force me to smoke. And I didn't want to. And all of a sudden, the show would be about peer pressure.
Oh, like a Degrassi precursor.
It was Degrassi precursor, but there was also a religious perspective. It was a Christian show.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So it was peer pressure. So we would have the clubhouse stuff that we would shoot in Toronto, but to do what would become, it was almost like a dream sequence. When we had a problem, we would go to the friendly school janitor. I know it sounds a little different. But we'd go to the school, who would say, you know what, I have a story about, you know, a girl who is facing the same kind of thing that you are. Let me tell it. And every time, his name was Dirk, every time he would tell those stories, it would then become this piece of theater or this sequence that we would act out. And those things took place all over the place. I traveled a lot as a kid with that show.
All over Canada or all over the city?
No, we did a lot of taping in the West Indies. So I spent a lot of my childhood in Jamaica. My parents said, yeah, you know what? This is all great and fine and dandy as long as you keep your marks up.
Yeah.
So the way it went, if there was a break for the holidays or March break, my breaks would always be extended, and that's when we would tape our show. We would tape those sequences. We cut a couple of albums along the way. This was my childhood.
So you were a child star
It
then.
was, I don't know if you want to call it that. But that's what life was like. So we shot the show on Saturdays. I think, you know, this early morning work ethic situation, my call as a kid was 6 a.m.
Yeah.
It was 6 a.m. My dad drove me every Saturday down the DVP. And we shot until about 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
And how many episodes of that did you end up doing?
Oh my gosh, I was on that show for 6 years.
6 years?
6 years. So it was my childhood from 10 to 16. It was a lot. It was travel. It was trying to hold down my marks.
Sure.
It was another family because grew up with a whole set of kids and spent time doing some really interesting things. And then somehow, you know, my marks were still pretty good, and I ended up going to Ryerson after that.
And you studied journalism.
I studied radio and television arts. At Ryerson.
Now you had been doing essentially theater prior to that. You were acting.
I thought I was going to act.
Right.
Mark, I thought I was going to be an actor and entered Ryerson, which is why I did radio and television arts.
Yeah.
So entered Ryerson, and I thought, you know what? Maybe writing as well. Always liked to write. And in my first year of school, met a young lady who had come to the program from Alberta. We became really good friends. And she got a job at Channel 11 in Hamilton, Ontario, writing for the news anchor, writing newscasts. So she was the weekend writer, and there was another job that had come up. And so she said, Mars, I know you like writing. It's Hamilton. It's a little far, but, you know, there's a lot to be learned. And she put my name in. And so I went in and I had to audition for this writing job. And they basically gave me some copy and I had to rework it. And they had me watch a story and I had to write elements and, you know, VO and that kind of thing. And I ended up getting the job. So throughout my time at Ryerson, I was a news writer on the weekends at Channel 11 in Hamilton. And then that news writing turned into reporting because it was a small enough shop. And this is what I loved so much about it. The opportunity was always there to do something.
Right,
I mean, someone would call in sick and all of a sudden
the writer gets launched.
The writer gets or you're, you know, reporting on something or can you edit? Or what, like that's what it was like.
So when did you get pulled in front of the camera?
So writing, this is what happened. So they didn't have a full-time reporter working on the weekends. And they kind of made our position, because there were two writers, a hybrid position. So we were writers / reporters in case of emergency, basically. Yeah. So that's how I got pulled in front of the camera. That, you know, one day I was there, you know, writing, and all of a sudden, you know, there was a fire that happened, and it was, okay, Mars, go. And it was just another element that they would have somebody on camera for their weekend newscast. Right. Usually it was a lot of VOs, a lot of voiced over reports because the anchor would come in later in the day. But with us there, we could actually put reports together that could be included in the show. Yeah. So we wrote them and we reported them. Wow. And did that. When I graduated from Ryerson, I continued to work there. And when I left Channel 11 in 97 for CTV for the network, I was the Queen's Park reporter. So I was doing politics, covering the legislature, but for Channel 11 in Hamilton. We had a bureau at Queen's Park.
So really climbing the ladder then, starting at the bottom and climbing your way
Oh my gosh.
up.
Listen, I'll tell you the Queen's Park story. My colleague retired. So I was reporting in Hamilton, and he was retiring. I had filled in a couple of times for him. And I'll tell you, Mark, it was the one area where I thought, this is my weakness. I'm not altogether comfortable reporting on these stories.
Right. And who was premier at the time?
It's hard to. Mike Harris was premier.
Okay, yeah.
So Mike Harris is premier, and I thought the thing was I wanted to create something that people could connect to.
Right.
And I found it hard to do that with political stories because, people will get up and they will say their piece and announce, another piece of legislature or something else. But how does this connect to the people that are going to be watching this piece, in the evening newscast? And that was my dilemma, bringing it home.
So how did you resolve that?
So my colleague was retiring, and I thought, I'm going to ask if I can have a shot full time. If I could maybe go and work at Queen's Park. So I went into my news director's office and I said, how about trying me? How about trying me for a while? If it doesn't work out, we can, not try me. And
this is fascinating because most people see something that they don't know how to do and they're afraid of it, right? You ran into it.
I wanted to conquer it.
Yeah.
I wanted to get better, and I didn't know any other way but to do it.
Right.
It wasn't something that could be taught. I wanted to be better and report from a place where I felt that I could be better and needed to be. And I knew I had to be in the mix to do that. So that's what I did. And he said, okay. And he let me go there. John Best, my news director,
took a chance
on me, and he let me go in, and it worked really well. And at that time, it was an interesting time. The reporter for Global at the time, a young woman, brilliant, by the name of Monica Kim. Alison Vushnick, who's at Global now, was there for CFTO, and I was there for Channel 11. So we were these women, these young women who were at Queen's Park, and there weren't a lot of women.
That was unusual.
At that time, it was unusual. Yeah. And so we helped each other a lot.
Oh, nice.
We shared clips. Should I be saying this?
Yeah.
We shared clips. We shared information, but we really lifted each other up.
Wow.
And it was actually Monica who was asked to come to CTV for an audition and then told them about me.
So how did you, actually, since you touched on it,
yes.
You mentioned being among a small group of women at Queen's Park at the time and probably doing the work you were doing, especially it sounds like an ambitious young woman at the time. What about being a black woman in the industry?
Yeah.
How did that impact your career, if at all?
Well, of course. I mean, because it's perspective and it's how you report. We all, come from somewhere. And so where I come from and who I am, reflects my perspective. I saw it as a complete advantage because I could bring my point of view, my perspective, which really wasn't pervasive. There weren't a lot of black people, a lot of minorities working in the industry. Right. You could probably count us on one hand, right?
Do you think that you ever encountered discrimination? Were you ever treated differently?
I don't know. And I say that, Mark, because you don't ever really know why you didn't get a job.
Right.
Right? Like,
True.
I don't know. I can't say, hey, this person discriminated against me because I'm a black woman.
Right.
But I think sometimes, did it take me longer to get here? Yeah, it did. Do I think that I was just as good as everybody else coming up with me at the same time? Absolutely. Sure. Do I think in some cases I was better? I absolutely do.
Yeah.
So whether the color of my skin had anything to do with that, I don't know.
Right.
What I do know is I'm here now and I'm loud.
Well, it seems to be working out well for you
I'm
so
loud.
far.
I do know that, right? And it's
also
also about knowing that there wasn't a ton of me around. There were trailblazers that came before me. Absolutely. But there wasn't a ton. And so for me, being able to pull others up and be here and say, hey, I'm here, which means you can be here, because if you can see it, you can be it.
Yeah.
That has meant everything to me.
Yeah, yeah. Where did you get your ambition? I mean, was it genetic, or was it from one of your parents? Was it, because it seems like you're just so driven in this respect.
I just knew that, I'm sure that there are people more talented. There are people that are more talented, but I wasn't going to be outworked.
I'm not so sure, though, that talent isn't always a thing. I think even people who are
what do you think it is?
Well, I think it's persistence, first of all. It's
perseverance.
Perseverance. It's mindset in some ways, being able to pivot when you're presented with
able to get back up.
An obstacle, get back up again, that resilience.
My parents, so my parents came to this country more than 50 years ago so that my dad could come to school. So background Trinidadian. My parents married. My sister was born in Trinidad. My dad had his eye on U of T. And so came to this country with my mom. They actually left my sister in Trinidad for a bit with grandparents, tried to make their way here. My dad attended U of T, and upon finishing his degree there, got a scholarship to Harvard.
Wow.
And this is, early 60s. Yeah. This is civil rights and all sorts of stuff. And he did his master's in French there. He's extraordinary. So is my mom. I can't imagine, and I've gone back to Boston. I was actually I was working on a piece on my dad and just haven't finished it. But I can't imagine being heavily accented black men in Boston at that time, and attending Harvard University, coming from this island, right? And all of a sudden, here you are. But he won this scholarship called the Woodrow Wilson Scholarship, and he got to choose any university in North America to attend to do his master's, and he chose Harvard. And so when you come from something like that, and my parents couldn't be in school at the same time. So my mom at the time worked for the government. She was a clerk, the provincial government, and had aspirations of being an accountant. And so at the age of, in her late 30s, because my dad was then settled and got his first job, and my sister was doing well, and then I was born. My sister is 7 years my senior. My mom had her turn. And my mom studied accounting and worked, continued to work, and got her CGA, became a certified general accountant, and then became a tax auditor for the provincial government, and did that for 25 years until she retired.
And you and your sister were still young when she was doing this?
So I was young,
yeah,
but my dad was teaching. He was an educator. So he was able to step in and take care of us.
Well, and this is what I was wondering.
All of that. That's what, this is what happened. So my mom would work during the day as my dad would, but having the hours that he did as an educator, he was there to, make dinner and take care of us and, do all the things. He was kind of two parents at once, so that my mom could go to school and also work. She would study at night. I remember clearly my mom studying at night. I remember her robe. I remember her being in the basement. I remember having to be quiet.
Yeah.
And then she would go to bed earlier. Sometimes, we were still up. My dad would take care of us. She'd wake up early to study before work and did this degree, but it was over an extended period of time because she was working on a part-time basis.
Yeah.
So was able to do all of that with my dad's support. And my sister, being 7 years older, was kind of like a pseudo mom as well. Right. So she took care of me a lot. And, you come from something like that. This is the quintessential immigrant story.
Yeah.
You come from something like that, and you better get it done.
Well, that kind of work.
You need to get it done.
Yeah, that work ethic, especially reading late into the night, studying early in the morning. That's something that you started to get to know when you got the call from Canada Ien, right?
So very well.
Yeah.
So Canada
when did
Ien.
that? Yeah, when did that happen?
Oh my goodness. So I returned from Halifax and was doing a hybrid shift where I was reporting a couple of days on then Lloyd Robertson show for the National News, and I was anchoring a couple of days on CTV News Channel. And those days that I was anchoring on News Channel, it was Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And that Friday meant that I was doing the news for Canada AM, but just once a week.
Right.
The job became available, and still AM was taking its news from News Channel. So it would be throwing to me going, and now here's Marci over at News Channel with the news. And everybody else was in a separate studio.
Okay, yeah.
And at some point along the way, probably, 6 months into it, a year into it, they thought, you know what, the chemistry might be good. I think maybe, we should try bringing Marci into the studio. And that's exactly what happened.
Yeah.
And that is how Seamus, Jeff, Bev, and I were born.
So you move back from Halifax back to Toronto, and then you start waking up at 3 a.m. or whenever it was that you woke up.
Oh my gosh. So here's the thing, right? Because people would go, so what a great shift, 6 to 9 a.m. It's great, right? And then you have the rest of the day. And then we'd all school them. Like everybody that's done a morning shift, right, will say, here's the situation. When I was the news anchor on the show, it's just the news, I was in there earliest because we had to look at what happened the night before. We had to look at international headlines. We had reporters in different bureaus that we could tap into for our newscast. So whether it was overseas, the Israeli bureau, whether it was the UK bureau, we had to check in with those reporters, see what was happening, and see if we could incorporate any of those stories into our newscast. So I was generally there between 3:45 and 4:15. That's at work. That's at work. Then we would have our editorial meeting and decide which stories were going to make it, what we would do, stories that were breaking that we needed to cover. And that's another thing. If there was breaking news, it was even earlier than that, because sometimes we'd break into News Channel and just go live, right? With any breaking news scenario. And that happened several times. So there was that. Then the live show, of course, was 3 hours, right? And then it was after the show, because sometimes, and many times, there were interviews that were taped. There were, celebrity guests that were in town. There were people that weren't going to be in town the next day, so we would pre-tape them. There were performances to watch, movies to watch, because what if we had an actor coming in, want to see their work? Authors coming in, want to read the material, want to read the work. It was a matter of being on call, as I look at it now, all the time. Because anything could happen, and we were delivering the news in the morning when people woke up. We had to be there and had to be fresh.
Well, and even then, Canada AM was an institution. It was the highest rated morning show. There wasn't a whole lot of competition, granted, but who would want to go up against Canada AM anyway? So did you ever have a moment of intimidation or doubt or fear coming into that? Or did you think, no, I got this?
I didn't. And here's why. Because you don't see the people watching, right? You've been in, Mark, the Canada AM studio. It's a lovely studio, but it's intimate because it is like, it was like family, right? It was a matter of, the camera people you've worked with for years, right? A floor director, your colleagues and co-hosts. You don't see who's watching. So very quickly, interviews that you do are like the one we're doing right now. You're just talking.
Just on the couch or at a table.
Just on the couch or at the table, or, on the deck outside, or in the music studio. That's what it was like. So you don't realize
there's millions of people watching.
Until you hear from them now and again, right?
And I'm sure you did.
We did all the time.
Yeah, all the time.
All the time, and encourage that too. But it's just that you don't see that. So there's no need for the nerves or anything, because it's what we're doing right now.
Yeah, I had the opportunity, the privilege to come on the show 5 times. I only got mugs from 3 of them, however, and they're still on my shelf. Maybe I shouldn't have said that either. But
they're serious. Those mugs, oh my gosh.
They were given to me. I didn't just pocket them. But anyway, that's right. They're collector's items now. So, so many stories. And it was very much a news show. It wasn't entertainment. It wasn't morning entertainment, right? It was a morning news show. But you still brought, I distinctly recall, a humanity to that, a certain, like you said, from your earliest days, that connection between the person, the viewer, and the story.
Thank you for that, Mark.
What were some of the stories that really stand out in your mind from that period in your career?
There are so many, but the stories that really stood out for me and that were hardest for me to report involved kids. And usually kids getting hurt. They resonated. When Sandy Hook happened, there was an extraordinary young woman who lost a son in that shooting incident. And she came on because she had a book. And the book was in remembrance of him. The book was about trying to find some sort of healing, trying to find power in her son's story, trying to do right by her son by bringing his story to others, and frankly, to government and change legislation or fight for change. She was extraordinary. And the whole idea of pivoting to forgiveness, the whole idea of finding empathy in a situation as heinous as that was absolutely extraordinary. And
I believe in Michelle Obama's new book, she said that was the worst moment of Barack Obama's presidency.
Absolutely. I mean, I can't see it any other way. How do you even begin to understand something like that? And then even the aftermath of that, the protests that happened, the things that those parents had to endure because it wasn't always kind.
And that must have been one of those events, too, where it would have been wall-to-wall live coverage,
It was wall-to-wall live coverage. And those are hard, as a reporter, those are hard things to cover.
How do you deal with that? How do you get through it?
I used to have what I called quilt days. And on those days, you know, when a Sandy Hook breaks or a shooting happens in the Loche, Saskatchewan at a school, I would go home and get under my quilt for a while and just be still. And because I was home during the day when nobody else was, everybody else was, you know, at school or work, I would just need still. I would need quiet, just rest, to just get away. Just get away from the headlines, get away from all of that, and just try to unpack it and try to find solace in some way. Those were hard days. You know, I've never been the kind of reporter, whether it's right or wrong, I'm not neutral. I did my job, but on the inside, I was never neutral.
Right. Do you think any reporter really, truly can be?
No. You know, we say we are.
Right.
Our stories reflect neutrality, but that doesn't mean we don't feel it on the inside.
Right.
And I always felt it on the inside. I always carried things with me, always. And I look at it now and I think, well, you know, maybe it's not such a bad thing. Maybe that's where the connectivity happens because I'm not a robot just spewing out a story because maybe I care. Yeah.
Most of the news is bad news. There's very few newscasts that are the good newscast, I guess, until you move over to the social where you do some lighter things, but you also tackle heavy topics there too. So how do you find the balance in your own life between being inundated every single day with these horrible news stories and then trying to find the good in people and the good in society? And
listen, you know, in our industry, and I don't think that it's changed much. There's this saying that if it bleeds, it leads. Right? And it's not that there isn't good news. We just don't always report on it.
Right.
And I know that. And so for me, that's where, you know, volunteerism comes into play. That's where charities come into play. That's where spending time with kids in a mentoring program comes into play. Because there is a lot of good news. We just don't always focus on it. And we need to focus on it more. Because you're right, there's enough of the bad stuff, but there's a lot of good. And there are so many good people out there. We just need to highlight them more.
Well, tell me about Loche then, because that's a tragedy that you tried to do something good with, right?
But this goes into the whole area of where I don't let go, right? This goes into that whole area of you should have just been reporting on the story and left it there, right? That's where this goes into, and I couldn't leave it there.
Well, can you tell us a little bit about the background and what you did?
Absolutely. So it'll be 3 years in January. A student at Denny High School in Loche, Saskatchewan, went home at lunch, and upon returning to school, on his way to school, went to his cousin's home and shot and killed them, 2 of them, continued to the school and shot and killed a teacher's aide in the office area, and then shot several other people, some of them quite seriously. And it was a devastating story. Our reporter, Jill Makashon, CTV National News reporter, did an amazing job bringing the story of Loche and Dene High School to Canadians. But it was just one of those stories that would not leave me. It was more than a story. And maybe because of my dad's background as an educator, probably because if I wasn't doing this job, I'd be teaching myself. And also because Indigenous affairs have always been very close to my heart. And so here was this story that combined all of that. One day, this was news headlines for a week, 2 weeks. And one day, the cover of the Globe and Mail had what they were calling a forgiveness circle on the front. They were telling the story of how the kids at Dene had decided to have this circle because the feeling was if one person had done something wrong in the community, that everybody was to blame. And there were rumblings that kid had said he had been bullied. And so they all came together seeking forgiveness as a community. And so what it looked like a huge bonfire, and kids were sitting around it. And I thought, my gosh, again, pivoting to forgiveness. How extraordinary is this? And then I also noticed that one of the kids, a couple of them were wearing caps, but one of the kids, you could prominently see it, was wearing a Toronto Raptors cap. And I am a huge basketball fan, and in particular, a Toronto Raptors fan. And so I thought, wow. And I wonder if, the Raptors have seen this. And here's where I didn't know what to do. I had interviewed Masai Ujiri a couple of times. We weren't friends. I didn't quite know how to reach him. So I started basically making up email addresses. I tried Masai.Ujiri, mujiri@raptors.com, all sorts of things. And I put school shooting in the subject line. And I asked if I could speak to him. And one of them worked, Mark, because my phone was ringing not too long after that. And he said, how can I help? So we started to meet. And we started to come up with a plan as to how we could help this community. And we thought we better get in touch with them first. So I start calling. But the administrator, the principal, Greg Hatch, at the time, isn't taking my calls.
And now, do you think it's because he's afraid you're media?
Yes. Yeah. So as Greg describes it, he said, I'd called several times, and his admin assist, as he was walking by one day, goes, it's that Marci woman again. She's calling again. And so he said, all right, put her through. And that was just it, that the media had descended upon, Dene and Loche. And then, when the story ended, everything ended, except the bullet holes were still, lodged in the front door of the school, and people were traumatized, and there just hadn't been a lot of help. Greg, by the way, is an amazing man. He's a legend there. And when the tragedy happened there, Greg was in the school that day, but frankly was transitioning to retirement. He was in the school as a consultant. He had stepped down as principal and was looking to retire, but still wanted to be part of the school community and was consulting with other schools in the province, and was there that day that the shooting happened. The entire administration, the principal at the time, vice principal, they all stepped down and went on mental health leave when that shooting happened. And they asked Greg to come back and run the school and to help with the healing process of that school, which is why he was acting principal. And he is the person that talked to me that day. He said to me, listen, Marci, we don't, want a handout here. We do need help. But if you really want to understand us, you have to come. And I said, what do you mean? He said, you need to come here. And I said, good point. Okay. And Masai and I got on a plane. And we flew to Fort McMurray, and then took a puddle jumper from Fort Mac to Loche. And Greg and his team were on the ground to meet us when we landed. And then short drive to the high school. We spent the day there. And we went in and out of classrooms that day, spent time with Greg and his teaching staff, and talked to kids. Masai, we had an assembly, and he spoke to the kids that day. He was amazing. And then we got back on a plane, and sitting in the Fort McMurray airport eating dinner, we decided that we wanted to do something more. and came up with this idea. I said, well, what if we bring some kids to Toronto? And I said, that's a great idea. I said, we'll get in touch with, people we know who can help and let's do this, just so that, Masai's whole thing is dream big, right? So it's dreaming beyond your boundaries. So we had this idea and we said we were going to work on it. So got back to Toronto. This is where, it gets even more interesting. So we've got the trip planned. The kids are coming. Everything's set. We've got everything set. And it is Boxing Day. And I'm sitting on my bed and I'm reading this book that has inspired me greatly called Books for Living. And it just talks about kindness and what more we can do and that kind of thing. And I start to think about what more we can do. And I think to myself, because I covered it, I know that the Indigenous people in this country came out for this prime minister. They ran out of ballots on reserve because they didn't expect people to come out and cast their votes. And they did. And the first time we went to Dene, we went to Loche, we didn't tell anybody. This time we thought, you know what? The kids are coming here. They can tell their own story. It's not for us to tell their story. They can tell their story. But I did think that it would be great for somebody to speak to them and so that they could be heard, that they deserved an audience. And so I knew that Katie Telford, the Prime Minister's chief of staff, followed me on Twitter. So I was able to DM her. And on Boxing Day, I DM'd Katie and said, hi, happy holidays. Would it be possible to talk to you about something? And I explained this entire story that I'm telling you to her, except that I added that the kids would be coming in the next month, in January, to Toronto. And they are the future of our country as well, and they deserve a voice, and they deserve a seat at the table, and they are still hurting. And where else in this country would there still be a high school riddled with bullet holes? After all of this, there's so much trauma there, and this whole idea of out of sight, out of mind, and that they deserve this much. Would it be possible for them to talk to somebody? And then that was it. I just left it out there. I went back to work. It must have been the 4th or 5th of January. And all of a sudden, this email pops up, and it's the director of operations for the PMO who says, can I give you a buzz? And he said, Marci, I think we can do something here. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, the Prime Minister is on a speaking tour, and he was landing in Toronto at that time. So I had to sit with that for a bit.
So how many kids are you talking here that you brought in?
10 kids came, and Greg and Martha Morin, his admin assist, came as well. And it was amazing. They flew in. It was on a Thursday. They came and visited us on the social. They were all in the front row. They had a microphone. They were able to talk about the past year and what had happened. Masai was on that day as well, and the ladies interviewed us like we were guests. And we told our story, but more importantly, the kids told their stories. And then later that afternoon, a bus took them to BioSteel Center. They had a wonderful Indigenous lunch prepared. You walked into BioSteel, you could see Welcome Dene High School and flashing lights everywhere, every board. It was lovely. And then the kids waited in the players' locker room as the Prime Minister of this country came through the doors with press behind him. Masai and I, mostly Masai, gave a tour of BioSteel. And then the three of us walked into the players' locker room, closed the door, and the Prime Minister had a discussion with these kids that lasted some 45 minutes. Wow. And they were able to share everything. And he shared back. And it was an amazing experience. Then those doors opened. The former coach of the Raptors, Dwayne Casey, was there, shared his story of growing up in segregated Kentucky. And so there was a Team Casey, a Team Trudeau, and the kids got to play basketball. It was great. There was the matinee on Sunday. They met all of the players. They were recognized at both of the games. They were on court holding the Canadian flag for one of the games. It was amazing.
What an
then
incredible
we
story,
put them on a plane. We put them on a plane the Sunday, and they went back. And we repeated that last year. And we're getting ready to do it again this year because we don't want it to stop. I should say, too, the Raptors a couple of months ago held a session there where they just went and coaches went and they opened the school and they played basketball and they learned the stories of various players and coaches. And they, Greg says it was just extraordinary.
Yeah. Have you heard from any of the kids or the people in this community what this meant to them?
I keep in touch and I talk to them on a weekly basis.
Really? Wow.
It has meant so much. One of the kids is now going to school here. He's in a film program here. I'm so proud of him. Have to catch up with him. Many of the kids are not finished high school. They haven't graduated yet. But hopefully they see that there are opportunities. They have my phone number. They have my email. We're on social media. So I keep track. And I talk to Greg like a couple of times a week. I texted him today.
Yeah.
On January 18th, they will be reopening parts of the school. So the school continued to be open, but a lot of it sustained damage.
And three years later? 4 years
3 years later, on January 18th, they will be reopening areas that have been refurbished and rebuilt. And I hope to be there. I hope to get there for that.
Yeah. It's incredible what you've been able to accomplish both in your professional career, but, to be able to give back to this community in this way that obviously has affected you so much. It's incredible.
I hope that this has repercussions across the country because what we've been able to do with the Loche, and we lobbied on behalf of this this community. There were a couple of Ottawa trips where we lobbied and we said we have to do better. We have to do better as a country. We hope that this has repercussions across the country, and also the whole idea that maybe if you pick up the phone. And just maybe if you reach out and try to do something, you can make a difference. Because really, I didn't know that people would say yes. Right. I didn't know if people would respond.
Well, but I mean,
anyway.
It's also partly, I think it's interesting to see the mix of your trademark persistence coming back again and again.
Yeah.
But also, you had a whole career of building up a whole lot of capital, a whole lot of respect.
I'm seeing that now, Mark.
You're seeing it now, but it's true. You're Marci Ien. Like, this is people, when you speak, people listen. When you approach these people, they're going to listen. And I think it's because they know that you're going to handle it well.
But look at where I am now. And this is what I mean about full circle.
Yeah.
I get to be on a show now where I can voice my opinion and do things like this.
Well, and
do things like this.
Yeah, so this is it. So you mentioned that during your involvement in La Loche, you left Canada AM. So this was big news in Canada within the industry and really everywhere because this was, 40 years or something on the air?
43.
43 years on the air. Kind of overnight, at least from a viewer's perspective. And I think
it seemed that way to many, I know.
It seemed that way, but it just is over all of a sudden. What was that like for you, having been there for 14 years and then needing to move on like that?
It was, you know what, I think everybody saw the tape. Of the morning that we signed off, and
I cried when I watched.
Well, listen,
I can't imagine you.
Well, listen, I did, and I did on the air, and what was happening was the last commercial break, and I was doing a deep dive under the desk because I was sobbing. It was really emotional for all of us, and then Bev looked at me. There's 20 seconds left, and says, "Okay, Mars, do what you normally do," and what I had normally done for years was say goodbye, Canada. And I could hardly get it out. Yeah. And it literally was, goodbye, Canada. And we went to black. Yeah. I could hardly get it out. And while that was, it was painful in many ways, it was also liberating in many ways.
Now, you didn't know, though, what you were going to do next. I mean, you had some assurance
that
you would do
something. I knew that I was going to be in production. Right. But I didn't know what that looked like.
Right.
And so it was a time where I went away for a bit, frankly. I took some time off. Yeah. And my boss was kind enough to allow me to do that just to kind of, figure out what was what. Mm-hmm. I didn't know for sure what I was going to be doing. But I'll tell you, and I think Blaze's reaction really encapsulates everything so well. When I told her that there were going to be changes and that, Canada AM had ended, she started crying. Really? And I said, Blazy, what's going on? And she said, does this mean you're going to be home for breakfast? No. Right? Yeah. Because her entire life, I had been gone in the morning. Yeah. She would wake up and I wasn't there.
Did you even think of that?
I didn't even. And I thought, I'm such a good mom. Yeah. I'm home early. I'm home when she gets home from school. I didn't see it through her perspective. Does this mean you're going to be home for breakfast?
Yeah.
And I just stopped in my tracks. And I said, absolutely, Blazy. It means I'm going to be home for breakfast. And guess where I am every morning now?
Yeah.
I'm home for breakfast, right? and I'm home after school too. But that person, her entire life, my kids, I was pregnant with, both of my kids during the run of Canada AM. So that's all she knew, right? Like I wake up and mom's not there. And this whole new chapter has been extraordinary. I get to learn. There's a newness still.
Right. Was it a shift for you, though, to go from a morning news show into something more entertainment-based?
Yes, because it's always been about everybody else.
Right.
When I sat down and talked to you, Mark, it was your story.
Yeah.
I would, throw questions out, but then I would listen. My job is to listen. My job is to ask questions that, enable you to share your story. Right. Now I'm sharing mine.
Now you get to talk.
Now it's
Look out.
So I'm supposed to get on the mic and tell you about me.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That's a completely different thing because my whole career and what I loved so much was to talk to other people about their stories and understand how they got to where they are and their journeys. And all of a sudden I'm talking about mine. So that's been the biggest change.
But now you've also, one of the things that I've noticed, especially, working with media on mental health and suicide in particular, which is my area,
yes.
There's a real, Canada AM notwithstanding at the time, there's a real hesitation to go into that kind of heavy stuff in an otherwise lighter format, right? But you guys have been trying to tackle some of these meatier issues as well. How do you make that sale, I guess, or do you have pretty broad control over
It's not even a sale because let's be honest about this, who doesn't have a story?
Sure.
Who doesn't have a family member? Who doesn't have a friend? Who themselves? Who doesn't have someone close to them who has gone through this in some capacity. Yeah. And that's what our show is. We share our stories, right? And we share the stories of others, and it is called The Social. So people reach out to us with story ideas. And oftentimes, they're stories just like that. And so we get these stories and we disseminate them and go, okay, wow, okay, if they're willing to share, or we'll have an author come on, or we'll have someone else come on, someone like you come on and share. So it isn't even a sales job. It's just life. Yeah. And we're just presenting life as it is, warts and all, hurt and all, mental illness and all. As Canadians, we go through it. Yeah. And Belle's done such a good job. I'm so proud of the job.
Through Bell Let's Talk Mental Health Awareness in Canada over the last, 6 years, whatever it's been, 7 years. It's been a tide change. It's been incredible.
You felt it, right?
I felt it, yeah. We would never be having this kind of conversation or putting that kind of stuff out there to audiences prior to that.
It's
just
so
didn't
taboo.
happen. And I've been involved in the field for that long, so I've been able to see the
That's
difference.
why I'm asking you.
It's night and day. It really is. Now, that said, I think we're doing a much better job of having these kinds of conversations. I'm not sure how deep they're going. We're still in a place where we're just raising awareness about, diagnoses and challenges and struggles. But that's partly why I want to do this show is, well, let's go a little bit deeper than that. Everybody has struggles and challenges, but what do you learn from it? What do you take from it? How does it change you? For me, the whole point of my story is that I didn't kill myself. So let's talk about everything that happened after.
Right.
But there was a long period of time that I still really needed to sit with the fact that I tried and I wanted to. And there was a point in my life where I couldn't see anything else outside of that. But then when I really reframed, and I heard this theme in what you were talking about a lot too, and how you frame your experiences.
Yes.
That's when things changed for me.
That's right.
I wouldn't take back even the hardest things that I've been through for the world because they taught me so much.
And then there's the whole idea of when you put your voice out there, and it takes such courage, your voice and your story out there, the people that you impact. I'm sure you've seen that because you bravely have said, listen, this is what happened to me. This is what I was going to do. I was going to take my own life. And this is why. And here's how I felt. When you put that out there, then people respond. They respond to that truth and that honesty. I'm sure they have.
That's my favorite part of this is that, and I try to remind people this all the time, and sometimes myself, that the story isn't actually about me. That the story is a window, it's a doorway to help other people share. That's the whole point. I mean, what happened to me has already happened. That's in the past. But some people haven't been able to open that up yet. And this is what I've seen. Well, I mean, this is what you do every day. You open that window for people to be able to share their story and to be able to open up those conversations. And now I'm so glad that you get to be loud about your story, too.
Really loud.
Really
Too
loud.
loud sometimes. They call me an oversharer.
Hey, you can always fix it in post. Marci Ien, thank you so much for joining me. It's been a real pleasure.
Oh, anytime and always. Thank you so much, Mark.
Well, that's it. That's my interview with the incredible, the fabulous, the beautiful Marci Ien. I had so much fun talking to her, and she's just such a special person. So thank you, Marci. You can see Marci Ien almost every day on the social, on CTV. So please look her up. And don't forget, while you have your phone out, to subscribe to the podcast, like it, leave a rating, share it with others. Those likes and shares really do mean a lot to us. You can subscribe on Apple Podcasts and all major podcast platforms. You can also visit us over at markhenick.com/socallednormal. You can follow me on social and talk to me. Let me know about what you thought of the episode or who you want to hear me talk to next. I'm on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Mark Henick, at MarkHenick. I'll remind you, too, if you want to check out 7 free days of highly qualified psychotherapy, online, accessible, available whenever you want, head over to betterhelp.com/Mark, enter the promo code Mark, and you can get that free trial of online psychotherapy. So go check that out. Thanks again for listening to So Called Normal. I'm Mark Henick.